Hello, I'm Zaccura and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be giving some advice and tips for young/new artists on how to get started and on how to improve. So whether you're an aspiring artist who's just getting into it, or if you've already been drawing for a little bit and you want to really boost your skills and you want to improve more, if you feel like you're stuck at your current level and you don't really know how to improve, I think that some of these tips will be very helpful for you guys because I've implemented them in my own journey so far and they have really helped me improve my skills. Now before I delve into the goodies of this video, I just like to put out there that I am not a very experienced artist, nor am I a traditionally trained artist. I am completely self-taught. So everything that I'm going to be saying in this video is just my opinion. They're all things that I personally found out or learned through experience, or I've heard from other people, other artists. So this is just purely honest advice, things that worked for me when I was starting out and things that helped me really boost my skills up to this point. Alright, now though. First is the tools. What do you need to get started? Now, it's easy if you're a new artist to get intimidated about what tools you think you need to make artwork. Because chances are, if you go on YouTube or really any other site that has artwork and you look at more experienced artists' work, you'll get flooded with tools like Copic markers and Winsor Newton watercolors, Prismacolor pencils, Bristol board, and Wacom tablets. And by constantly seeing this, you may fall into the trap of thinking that you need these tools in order to create good art. But that can be farther from the truth. All you need to get started on drawing is to just grab a pencil and some paper and start drawing. Like right now, like you have my permission to pause this video and go grab a pencil and a piece of paper and then, come back and draw while you're listening to the rest of the video. But seriously, you really only need a pencil and a paper. And what kind of pencil? Well, I think a good example would be for this drawing that I'm actually drawing in this video was completely done with just one pencil. And what pencil is it? It is a party favor pencil. It's not even an artist grade pencil. It's the kind that you buy for like $2. That's the kind of pencil that I'm using in this video. The lead on the inside is the exact same lead that is in regular everyday yellow HB number 2 pencils. So if you've got one of those lying around, or any other pencil really, you can draw. That's kind of what I was aiming to do for this illustration, was to just use completely non-artist grade materials. So the pencil is really cheap like that, and the eraser, I'm using a student grade like eraser that you put on top of your pencil for school. I also use a ruler later on in the video to get the box around the drawing, which is also just the same plastic clear one that everyone uses at school and stuff like that. And the paper is cardstock, which is not artist grade paper. I didn't even have to use cardstock. I just wanted to because I wanted this illustration to have like a thickness to it, since it's not in a sketchbook. But if you have like a sketchbook or even just computer paper, it works totally fine. So yeah, that is the only tools that you need. And while I do pretty much guarantee that once you get more experience, you will start to branch off and use other materials. You will probably start to accumulate some of these fancy, tools like Copic markers and watercolors and Prismacolor pencils and Bristol boards, and maybe even try your hand at digital artwork. But that is by no means something that you need just to start drawing. I've drawn on everything. I've even done drawings on sticky notes and stuff, so really you don't need anything fancy. So now I'm going to go more into the tips for improvement. What do you do now that you have your paper and your pencil? How do you improve? How do you draw? So my first tip for improving is probably the most boring one, since you'll find that every single artist will say this to you. practice, practice, practice. Practice really does make perfect, and if it doesn't make perfect, it at least makes better. Just saying, the more you practice, the better you get. It's just that simple. The way I like putting it, and I mentioned this in an earlier video of mine, is that every minute, every second that you're holding your pencil to your paper and you're drawing, you're gaining EXP, and at some point you will level up. And every minute that you're away from the paper and you're not drawing, your EXP is stagnant. It doesn't go up. So the more you practice, the faster you level up. It's that simple. When I was new, I practiced every single day. You couldn't tear me away from my sketchbook, okay? Whether it was at home or if I was driving in a car, in the passenger seat, obviously. Or I've even tried one time, I remember I tried drawing while I was walking, and that didn't end very well. So I don't recommend drawing while you're walking. But yeah, just draw all the time. So I say always recommend to always have a sketchbook with you. It doesn't have to be a fancy sketchbook. They can be like the really cheap ones that you find in, like, you know, the kids arts and crafts aisle. As long as it's a pad full of blank paper. Don't get anything with lines on it or anything like that. You can even use computer paper, but I find that the sketchbook is better because it's easier to carry around, and also the paper just is overall better for erasing, because when you're new you're going to be erasing a lot, obviously. So yeah, always carry a sketch. That's like one part of my first tip. Practice every day, and always have your sketchbook with you and your pencil, so that anytime that you have a chance to draw, anytime you feel like drawing, that sketchbook is always there and you can always draw. Now the next tip is one that I find is really useful, is draw from photo reference and learn to draw from life. And this is another one you may have heard from artists, and if you're not interested in realism, that may sound really boring or really hard or something like that. But learning to use reference photos and learning to draw something from life, these skills will really help you in whatever you're doing, maybe except for abstract. You know, if you're only doing abstract paintings or something like that, then I guess learning how to draw an object in real life may not help that. But if you ever want to, you know, put an object in your abstract painting, being able to draw something from reference or from real life is really helpful. Drawing from life is a little harder than drawing from a photo because it's 3D, but I find that it is even like better than photo reference. Because you can just anything you want. Like if I want to draw my guitar, I can just go and look at my guitar and draw it. Yeah, so to practice this, you can just take any object in your room and just sit down with your sketchbook and try and draw it. And it doesn't have to be, you know, perfect. It may be kind of hard and weird, but really doing this stuff really helps you, because it will also not only teach you how to turn 3D objects into 2D drawings, you'll also learn things like lighting and shading, and you'll be able to really look at the world with your artist eye. And I find that the more that you try drawing from life, the more fun it becomes, and the easier it becomes, obviously, because you're practicing. And I guess this is kind of going into the spiritual realm here, but it kind of makes you feel like the world is more beautiful. Like you look at the world and, you know, no longer do you just see a car or a tree, you see an opportunity for a beautiful drawing. One of my favorite things to do is just going outside, you know, to a cafe or a park or something like that, and just sitting and just drawing something. I love drawing people. So if I'm like at a park or something like that and there's like kids running around, or if there's like people talking to each other, I will try and just really quickly sketch them, you know, before they stand up or move away and stuff like that, which, by the way, is really great practice too, because it really helps you learn how to hold images in your head, because once people move away and walk away, they're gone. You can't meticulously look at them. You just kind of have to remember, oh, is that how they were sitting? Or you just have to move on to something else. I realized, like, wow, everything can be a drawing. Everything can be pretty. Everything can be beautiful. You know, I'll be, you know, sitting and I'll see a son and a father, learning how to set up their drone that they bought for the first time in the field, and I would draw it and I'd look at it and I'd be like, wow, that's actually, is there something about that just looks so nice, and like I'll see a little kid chasing bubbles, and I'll be like, wow, that's just so pretty and it's so beautiful. So that's kind of in the spiritual realm here, but I did find that doing these things not only helps you improve your skills, but I think it just makes you appreciate the world around you more. Then my next tip is to learn how to break things down into basic shapes and use guidelines. It's a very common mistake that new artists make is drawing the details first. So as you draw, let's say, a character, as you maybe start with the face, and you draw the chin, then you draw the neck, then you draw the collar of his shirt and his tie before drawing his shoulders, then you draw the wrinkles in his shirt as you're drawing his body, and you're drawing like SpongeBob. First I draw this head. You're drawing the entire finished drawing on your first go, and this is a very difficult way to draw, and it's just a very bad habit to have. You're making it way too hard on yourself if you draw like this. I was a total victim of this too. This is totally how I drew before. But the moment I learned how to use guidelines and learn how to break things down into basic shapes, things became so much easier to draw. So if you're going to be drawing, let's say, a figure, draw the figure first, the basic shape of the head and the body in the pose that you want, and get that down first until you're happy with it. Then add things like clothes and details and shading on top of it. And also use guidelines, because guidelines are really helpful if you want to get proportions correct for things like the face, and if you want to get your initial skeleton of your character down, you use guidelines to help you along with that. And if you see more experienced artists, you see that sometimes they don't really use those guidelines, and that's really just because they kind of grew out of them and they don't need to use them anymore. For me, example is when I draw faces, I really only use 2 lines. I just do a cross on the face so that I kind of know what direction I want the face to be facing in, but after that I just go right ahead and just eyeball where the nose and the lips and the eyes will be. But that's not how I always drew. I used a lot of guidelines on the face before to really help me get the eyes in the right place and the nose in the right place, and so on and so forth. So yeah, you make it really hard on yourself if you don't use guidelines. And also what happens is you end up getting some bad habits, because if you keep practicing on drawing without using guidelines, you will get better at it, that's true, but you'll probably only get better at that one pose. And this is why a lot of times new artists tend to only draw in like 2 different poses, usually like a front pose and maybe a profile pose, because those are the only 2 poses that they feel comfortable with drawing, and the only ones that they ever really practiced. And anytime you want to try a new pose, boom, you're back to square one, and all the proportions are off, and the arms are too long and the legs are too short, or something along those lines. And so you're just making it so hard on yourself. But if you learn how to break down anatomy into its basic shapes, and you understand the guidelines of anatomy, then it really allows you to just draw any pose that you want. And this goes also back to the drawing from life and from photos. When you look at an object or a person, you may, and you're sitting down with your sketchbook and you're like, all right, I'm going to draw this, you may just end up being like gobsmacked, like, where do I start? Where's the first line that I put down? How do I draw from life? So being able to see the basic shapes within objects that you see in real life helps you break it down so that you know how to draw from real life. And I think this also goes into the whole artist eye thing. It's being able to see objects and being able to really delayer them, decomplicate them, and break them down into their basic shapes. Now obviously this is easier when you're doing like man-made objects like houses and chairs and tables, because these things tend to be squares and triangles and rectangles, and those are very simple shapes. But the moment you start getting into more organic things like anatomy, things start to get a little harder, because even if you do break down the body, for example, into the basic shapes, those basic shapes are kind of squishy and they can bend in ways, and it's kind of weird. And so learning anatomy is definitely a difficult thing, and I haven't mastered it yet, but the more you do it, again, practice, the more you do it, the easier it becomes. Do study sheets. This is one thing that really helped me. Do studies of things that you're struggling with. So what this means is, if you're struggling with things like anatomy or hands or trees, then just study that one thing over and over again. So sit down with your sketchbook and look up some photos of random people, or you can even use yourself as reference and just fill up a page of different poses and fill up a page of different trees. One example that I can give you from my own personal experience was, I severely struggled with drawing hands, which is pretty common. Most people tend to struggle with hands when they're new, and so, like most new artists, I tended to only draw my characters in a couple of different poses, because I was only able to draw their hands like from the front or from the side, with like a relaxed hand from the front or from the side, and that was really all I could do. And it was starting to become really limiting. I had these ideas for different drawings and different poses that I wanted to draw, but then I was like, oh, I can't do that because the hands are gonna look totally off. So eventually I was just fed up with it, and I said, darn it, I'm gonna learn how to draw hands. And so what I did is, I sat down at my table with my sketchbook, and I just held up my left hand, because I'm a righty, so I draw with my right hand, and I just held up my left hand in some random weird position, and I just challenged myself to draw it. And after I did that, I put my left hand in another weird position, and I challenged myself to draw that, until I had a whole page full of hands. And just that one sitting, it was a few hours, frustrating hours, I'll admit, but just after that one sitting, hands really start to become something that was really demystified. I still wasn't great at it. I still struggled with it, and I'd say even to this day, hands are still something that I'm not 100% comfortable with, but it really became something that wasn't limiting, because I knew that as long as I kept doing this and I kept trying to draw hands in different poses and just challenging myself, that I would get better and I'd be able to do it. So these studies are really helpful. The next tip is learn to draw in perspective. Now, this is something that I personally am actually only kind of scratching the surface really myself, because I really slacked off on learning how to draw backgrounds, because I didn't want to learn how to draw backgrounds, and now I'm like, I want to draw backgrounds, how do I do it? And perspective is, if you don't know what perspective is, it's you see it every day. It's when objects that are closer to your eye appear larger, and things that are farther appear smaller, and they always follow the rules of perspective. And if you know these rules of perspective, you can draw using these using guidelines that will help you get perfect perspective. So you don't have to just eyeball things and things start looking wanky and like not realistic and stuff like that. So definitely learn that. I'm kind of still learning 2-point and 1 and 3-point perspective, because they're getting they're a little confusing. So yeah, try them out, especially if you're going to be drawing backgrounds, and especially if you're going to be drawing backgrounds with like cityscapes and buildings and things like that. Then perspective is really useful, and it's just a really great tool to have, even if you don't really draw backgrounds as much and you're like, oh, I'm just going to draw portraits for the rest of my life. Chances are at some point you're going to want to expand and do something different. So learning these things can be really fun, and adding backgrounds to your drawings is fun, let's put it that way. And especially if you want to be a landscape artist, then learning perspective is really useful. My next tip is do studies of existing art. And what this means is you take art that already exists, someone else did it, and you try to recreate it. Now, don't misunderstand what I'm talking about here. One, never ever trace. Never trace drawings that exist. It doesn't help anyone, it doesn't improve you as an artist, and it's disrespectful to the artist who originally created the drawing. So never ever trace. What I'm talking about when you copy a drawing, when you do a study of a drawing, is you copy it on your own. You look at it and you try to draw it on your piece of paper. And by doing this, you will unlock the techniques that were kind of used in that drawing. And along the way, you will learn a lot about how that drawing came to be. Now, there's a little danger zone though with doing this, is that I really recommend you don't do these very often. And the reason is because when you're new, chances are these studies are going to be your best work, or at least you're going to think it's your best work. You're going to look at your copied drawing of an existing piece and it's going to come out pretty decent, and you're going to be like, wow, this looks so great. You'll show it to your friends or your family and they'll be like, wow, that looks so good, great job and whatnot. And then when you try and draw something on your own, things are all over the place. The anatomy is wrong and the shading is off and your lines aren't smooth and stuff like that. And so this can be really bad for your mindset as an artist, and it can be really discouraging to do your own artwork. And so you may fall into the trap of constantly just doing these studies, or even copying, screenshots from anime or from TV shows or from cartoons. And this can be really dangerous to your growth as an artist, because the purpose of these studies is to further your technique, to further your abilities as an artist. So you just always have to keep in mind that when you're doing these studies, that is all it is. It's just a study. It's not a piece of artwork. It's not something that you really created. You did for purely the purpose of studying and for furthering yourself and furthering your abilities as an artist. And that also means if you do decide to post such studies online, make sure that you are giving proper credit to the original artist. Put a link to the original piece, make clear that this was a copy of someone else's artwork, and they will probably be totally fine with you. But if they're not, on the off chance they actually come to you and they say, I prefer you take this down because you just copied my piece of artwork and I don't like that, be respectful and do take it down, because that they own that concept, that drawing, and by copying it, it doesn't mean that you own it, and that kind of goes into copyright law. And so just be respectful of the artist and realize that it was their concept, it was their idea, not yours. Besides, you're doing these studies to further your abilities, to study, not to get a bunch of followers. And of course, this probably goes without saying, never ever ever sell these, because that is plagiarism to the highest degree. But yes, doing these studies can be very helpful, and I find I only did very few of them, and only when I was new, but I did find that they actually did very much help me with improving my skills. But you also want to be careful who you're copying or what you're copying, because you may be picking up on their awesome techniques, but you also may be picking up on a lot of their bad habits. And so that's why really just not doing these too often, I find, is just the safest route. It's just the best route. You want to focus more on your own art. And if you want to try and do a study of an art to help further your abilities, that's great, but it shouldn't be like your main thing. It shouldn't be something you're doing every day. My next tip is break out of your comfort zone and be open-minded to all different kinds of art styles. Chances are, if you're an artist, you're interested in drawing, there is some niche or some realm of art style that you are more keen to drawing. You like it the most. Something that inspired you to draw in the first place. whether it be flowers or dogs or maybe cartoons, or like me, anime and manga. So this field will tend to be what you're going to be drawing the most, and that's okay. But you want to make sure that you aren't limited to this one field of study. Learn to break out of this comfort zone and be open-minded and try out different kinds of styles. For example, if you use social media and you follow artists, chances are most of the artists that you're going to be following will have similar styles to the ones that you aspire to have. But also go and follow some other artists. I follow oil painters and cartoonists and landscape artists and realism artists, and as well as lots and lots of manga and anime style artists. And doing this is not only inspiring, but it's also really helpful to it helps you learn so much if you just try one day to draw in a cartoony style if you mainly only do anime and manga. Or if you mainly do cartoony, maybe try anime and manga, or try realism. I did all kinds of stuff. I did semi-realism, I did realism, I did some self-portraits, I did cartoony stuff, and I've also done like random acrylic paintings of a flower or something like that. And so just breaking out of it, I found that every single time that I break out of my comfort zone and I try something new, I end up learning something that ends up carrying over to when I go back to my niche, to my realm of what I enjoy to draw the most. It ends up actually helping me there as well. So I find that by broadening your spectrum of artwork and styles will help you in whatever style that you end up enjoying to draw the most. But then that brings me to the next tip, and that is probably the most important tip, especially when you're new, and that is to never forget to draw what makes you happy. This is really, really important, because often what happens when artists start to get serious about art and they want to learn, so they look up videos like this one to learn how to improve, or they may go to art school or take classes and so on, and they get flooded with all these things like drawing from life and from photos, learn to break things down into basic shapes, break out of your comfort zone, do studies, blah blah blah. And some of this stuff can be kind of boring and hard and not what you're interested in, and that you may get into your head like, oh, so this is what it means to be an artist. And that can be really discouraging. You're like, I didn't want to, I got into art because it was fun, because I want to draw what I want to draw, not to do all these really boring things. And so you're telling me that if I want to be an artist, I have to do all these boring things, and that's what it means to be an artist. But that isn't true. All these tips, all these things, all these boring studies are simply tools. Just like you have your pencil and your paper, your physical tools, you also have your skill tools, or I guess your mental tools. All of these things, like learning how to draw from life, learning perspective, doing studies, learn how to break things down into basic shapes, they're all there to help you improve and draw whatever it is that you want to draw. They're tools that once you learn, they're at your disposal to use in whatever way your heart desires. You can choose to not use them. You can choose to twist them up, or you can choose to completely use them in your drawing. But the point is that these all should be choices. If you want to draw cartoony characters that don't follow the rules of anatomy, it shouldn't be because you just never learned how to draw anatomy and therefore you're limited to only drawing cartoon characters. It should be because you chose not to use anatomy. You chose to make them cartoony and to not follow those skills. So that brings me back to the point, and that is, on your journey of doing all these different studies and so on, never forget to hold on to whatever it is that you're passionate about. that whatever niche, whatever realm that you love to draw in the most is your realm. It's your art, and you can do whatever you want with it. And never let anyone make you believe that your passion, the way you want to draw, the things you like to draw, and the things that make you happy aren't a valid passion, or it's not a valid field of art, or make people believe like if you draw like this, then that's not art. Because chances are, if you're doing basically anything other than realism, you're gonna encounter someone along the way who's going to be like, oh, that stuff is for kids, that stuff isn't art, you should seriously go and learn to do some real art. And as a person who does mainly anime and manga work, there's a lot of people out there who really genuinely believe that anime and manga type drawings and artwork isn't art. And you can't let these opinions get to you. You can't let them really make you believe that whatever it is that makes you happy and whatever it is that you like to draw isn't art. Because art is whatever you make it to be. And by no means am I trying to discourage anyone from taking classes or going to art school and so forth. I'm personally a self-taught artist, but by no means am I trying to discourage people from taking art classes and from going to art school, because there are plenty of artists that are really, really happy and they're really thankful for that experience. Now, the very last tip, I'm going to be talking a little bit about digital artwork, and as well as some things to avoid in regards of digital artwork and learning how to draw. So I am both a traditional and a digital artist, so I understand the difficulties of both, and I wouldn't say that either of them is harder or easier than each other. They're just different. They both have their difficulties, and they are both their own medium. They're different. So I've been doing digital artwork for most of my art journey so far. I've done both for most of my art journey so far. I started drawing in mid 2014, and then I started digital artwork sometime, I think 2015. So I've been kind of doing both for a couple years already. And so some tips though in regards to doing these studies that I mentioned, and whether or not you should be doing them digitally. So I really recommend that all of these studies that I mentioned, if you're going to be learning how to draw from life, and you want to do one of those studies where you sit down at your desk and draw your hand over and over again, I recommend doing these studies traditionally with your sketchbook. And the reason is not because I think that digital artwork is really easier, but there are certain tools that digital art has that you don't have traditionally, that do make some of these basic things easier. For example, being able to undo, being able to zoom in and out, being able to copy and paste things, and being able to select certain parts of the drawing and make them larger or smaller, or even slightly change their shape without having to redraw them. And all of these tools are there to make your life easier and to make the whole drawing process faster when you're doing digital artwork. But you don't want to grow dependent on these tools. So, for example, a very common thing people do digitally is if they're drawing a face, say, they will draw one eye, then they will just copy and paste that eye and flip it around and use it as the other eye. And that's totally okay to do, because when you're doing a drawing digitally, your main focus is making a drawing. So, to make the whole process faster and easier, that's totally okay to do. But if you keep doing this and that's all you're doing, and every single drawing that you draw, you're only drawing, the right eye or the left eye, whichever one is easier for you, you will pick up on a really bad habit, and that is you won't be able to draw both eyes. And you'll have that, the wrong other eye syndrome, which is very common, where you can't get the other eye to match. And so if I were to take away your digital materials and give you a piece of paper and a pencil and I say, draw me a face, you'll be helpless because you'll only be able to draw one of the eyes. And that's really why I recommend that when you're doing things for studying purposes, not when you're making illustrations, but just when you're doing these studies to learn how to draw, I recommend you do them traditionally. Because by limiting your tools, you force yourself to really understand the objects that you're drawing and really understand how to draw them. Basically, if I were to take away all these tools on your digital artwork, you still should be able to, draw the other eye. You still should be able to get the anatomy right. Even if you have to erase it and redo it, you still should be able to actually do that without having to, select the leg and make it longer or shorter because you can't draw it in proportionate to the body. If I were to remove that ability, you still should be able to just erase and try again, and you will eventually get it. And you should also be able to ink out your drawings without having to undo. So these are all very useful skills to learn as an artist. And I'm not trying to scare anyone from away from doing digital artwork, because I started it very early on, and I find that I think actually doing both helped. Things that I learned traditionally ended up carrying over to my digital artwork, and things that I learned digitally ended up carrying over to my traditional artwork. So they both really helped me grow, I think, as an artist. So I wasn't really able to get into much detail for any of these tips, but if you'd like a tutorial on any of them, be sure to leave a comment asking me about that, and I'm sure I'd be glad to make a tutorial on any of these subjects. Just again, like things like the perspective, things that I'm still learning myself, probably not going to be like the best person to learn from. There are a lot of other YouTube artists out there. So if you want to learn how to do perspective and stuff like that, then I'd recommend, just typing in on YouTube, and you'll find lots of different tutorials from much more experienced artists that will help you with that stuff. But again, if you guys request a video for any of these topics, I'll do my best to make a video on them. So that brings me to the end of this video. I really hope that these tips and advice will help you guys. I really, really do. Again, it's all just things that I personally have accumulated as a self-taught artist, things that I personally have learned and implemented in my own drawing journey. So I really hope that you found these advice helpful, and if you like this video, if you found it useful, or if you just found it entertaining at all in any way, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on upcoming videos. All the links to my social media pages are in the description box, so you guys can follow me for daily updates. And until next time, stay awesome, stay inspired, always. See ya!